there's so many loopholes that protect the abuser and nothing to do. There isn't any form of, there's no backing to the survivor. They get one chance and one chance only. And that shouldn't be that way.
The following podcast may contain discussion of domestic and/or sexual violence, stalking, suicide, and PTSD. There is also the possibility of strong language that may be inappropriate for young listeners.
Highlines Help would like to give a great big shout out to the Purple Shelf Farms, who have donated several items to Highlines Help. They have some great products. They are a veteran-owned family farm located just east of Conrad, Montana, and they specialize in all natural dairy, poultry, and produce. Committed to sustainable farming practices, Purple Shelf Farm delivers fresh, wholesome products straight from their fields to your table. You can explore more about their offerings at www.purpleshelffarms.com or find them on Facebook. Thanks, Purple Shelf.
Highlines Help acknowledges that our parties mentioned in this podcast are innocent until proven guilty by a court of law, and all statements are the opinions of the guests. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Views and opinions expressed by guest speakers are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the view of Highlines Help for abused spouses or any of its funders, employees, or board members.
Hi, and welcome to Highlines Help's podcast, Breaking the Silence, bringing domestic violence and sexual assault into the light. This is the second episode in a series talking with Angela Mastrovito. Angela's daughter, Rebekah Grace, disappeared on July 20th, 2021 near Missoula, Montana. Her vehicle and personal belongings were found off Interstate 90, but Rebekah and her dog were missing. In the previous episode, we got to know the special person that Rebekah was and always will be remembered as. Today, we will learn about her relationship with her then husband and the abuse, control, and manipulation of that relationship. Angela talks about Rebekah's determination to leave and start her life over while staying in the Montana that she loved. This particular episode goes up to the time Rebekah went missing. So please subscribe to hear the rest of this unbelievable interview coming in the next several weeks. If you haven't already listened to part 1, I encourage you to go back and do so.
She was supposed to have this really elaborate wedding, and that's what she kept talking about, and on horseback and on a farm and with the wagon and all this, and then just out of the blue, I get a text message, "We eloped." And I'm like,
oh, wow.
Oh, okay. And no real, explanation. But I didn't hear from her after that for several weeks. When we got out here, I started going through my old emails, and I found the email that was just 3 weeks after she got married. And out of everything I could have said, the email I wrote to her was, "Are you safe?" I don't know why. I've tried to think back over and over and over. Why did I choose those words? And I must have received a response but she must have called or something at that point.
Did she wonder why you would ask that question?
I don't remember the conversation after that. Yeah. It's just something that I can't recall, but because it shocked me when I found that email. I mean, it was just buried all these years later, because this was 2021 that I was going back through communications with her. And I don't remember. I just don't remember. I wish I did, But the conversations, the communications became less and less. They were always on the move, Didn't stay long in one place at all. I lived in Billings and Bonner, in Alberton, in Superior, in Missoula. They were just always on the move. The friends that I met after we came out here said that their relationships with Rebekah became challenging after she got married. They couldn't stay in touch. So I guess I say all that because there were signs there that at the time I either refused to acknowledge or didn't acknowledge that maybe everything wasn't quite right. And Rebekah was a very private person, so she really didn't say much. In 2016, she did come home out of the blue. She just called and said, I need to come home. And I said, okay. She came home and she stayed a month, a little over a month maybe. And all she would tell me was, we need a break from each other. That's all she would tell me. Little did I know that she told her brother, she went to go visit her brother while she was home, that while she was watching TV, David had shot the TV and blown the TV with the gunshot.
Oh, wow.
I wasn't aware of that until after she went home. When they met, David was a functioning adult, but he kept playing this card of being a disabled vet. And as the years went by, from 2015 to 2021, there were surgeries, there were accidents on the job, there were accidents at home. He really created this scenario of disabled vet. And eventually the story got written where he needed 24/7 caregiving. And I never really understood, I never got a full picture of that. But he was awarded 24/7 caregiving, and there's something in the Montana VA laws that if you live so many miles away, your family can be your caregiver. Mm-hmm. So when they purchased their home in Superior, and I didn't understand at the time, Rebekah didn't like the fact that they were moving so far away out of Missoula. She didn't like the fact that it was so remote. But she wouldn't ever say why. Then after they moved, or right around the time they moved, Rebekah all of a sudden became David's 24/7 caregiver. Throughout this time, Rebekah would try to have a job, but she could never keep a job after she got married. There was always an interruption. David would show up at the job site, at the restaurant and sit, and I was informed anyways that he would sit at the bar and watch her work, and he'd be asked to leave, and that she was an employee there to serve the customers. So even during her marriage and while she was at working, there was stalking going on, but she never really alluded to that. I learned all this afterwards in talking to her friends and her coworkers. I remember one time she said, well, I'm going to clean houses. And I said, well, why are you going to do that? And she goes, because if David needs me, I can get home. I don't have to be there from 8 to 5 or 5 to midnight. I can get home if he needs me. But even that didn't work out, because he would call and say there was an issue. He needed her right away. And then she couldn't get back to the house to clean it.
Total control.
Yes. Her friends stopped calling her because actually their husbands didn't like the situation. So she just lost contact with everyone, or I won't say everyone, but quite a few people that could have helped. Our calls became more centered around David. David would be the one to call and communicate with me. Rebekah was busy. Rebekah was doing this. Rebekah was doing that. Rebekah would be there for a few moments to speak on the phone, and then all of a sudden, David would intercept the call and the communication process. And David is a charmer. He is a charmer. He can have you convinced. He's a storyteller. And he can just bring you in so that you will believe every word. You will leave the conversation questioning and not being able to figure it out. but at the same time, he's just woven this play, if you will. And he actually knows what the next scene is going to be. And then that next scene comes to fruition. But Rebekah would use her opportunities of running errands to town is when she would call me. But being in Montana, going in and out of the mountains, you lose connection. So we would drop calls often. And she, so then she would try to call me when she got into town and she was at Walmart or whatever. But she was running her errands. And I remember one distinct phone call where she was crying. And she said, "Mom, I can't do this." And I said, "Well, I don't understand what's going on." And I always pictured their relationship kind of like Dr. Quinn and Sully from Medicine Woman. It was just like, that was the concept I had from all the wild stories they told me. And, bears on their yard and at their door and all this stuff. So I was trying to figure it out. And she goes, "Mom, I'm the husband. I'm the wife. I'm the one who splits the wood. I'm the one who feeds the fire stove. I'm the one who does all the housework. I'm the one who," she said, "I'm doing all these roles and I can't do them." I'm like, "Well, you need a break." "Well, I can't take a break. I'm David's caregiver." It made it sound like he was an invalid, but he was an invalid, because he was up and about and doing things. He supposedly was training service dogs for other people and to sell. He was having pig roasts and he was hosting Thanksgiving dinners. And I'm like, well, how is he doing all this if you're his caregiver? So there was a huge disconnect of understanding on my part, because I couldn't figure it out. I wasn't getting the whole story anywhere.
Right. Yeah.
And then after Rebekah became caregiver to David, I would start getting phone calls like every 3 months. Late at night, David kicked me out. And this was after they moved into their home in Superior. And I'm like, "He kicked you out? How does he? That was totally foreign to me. How do you kick somebody out of your own home?" Right. And he goes, "Well, he kicked me out." But she wouldn't go into any details. And so Rebekah had a credit card of mine that she had always had for emergency. And I would say, "Well, go get a hotel room." I'm in Virginia. Go get a hotel room. And at least that way you've got a place to sleep for the night. And there would be nights that she would go get a hotel room, but then there would be other nights she would sleep in the truck. Then I wouldn't hear from her for a couple days, and I'd go, okay, she just needs space. You're dealing with an adult, and you're dealing with somebody who you don't want to infringe on their privacy. So you're trying to there's this strange atmosphere of trying to respect another individual for their decisions, but not knowing how to help them.
Right.
So I would let a couple days go by, and then I'd call and I'd say, "What's going on?" And she'd say, "Well, we're going to try to work it out." And so this was the cycle every 3 months. We're going to try to work it out. David says things are going to change. And I'm like, okay. And then she finally called January or February of 2021 and said, "I really think we're going to split up." And there had been some real issues before then. Shortly after they bought their home, Rebekah sent me a text and said, "What did you and Dad do when you split up?" I'm like, "What do you mean, what did we do?" She goes, "With the house." And she goes, "What do you do with the house?" And I said, "Well, 2 adults split the equity 50-50. That made David very mad. That really set him off. He stopped calling. He stopped any communication with me from June of 2020 to January of 2021. In January, I received the strangest text, and I wish I still had it, but somehow all my texts from him disappeared. I woke up one day and they were all gone. But he had written, "I know we've had our differences, but I hope you have a wonderful 2021. At the time, I'm like, well, I figured he'd come around someday.
Can I ask a question there?
Yeah.
It's in my head. you had mentioned that he was a charmer, that he could pull you in and convince you of just about anything, which is very typical of an abuser. When you first met him, what was your initial reaction or opinion when you first met him?
So we didn't meet David in person until 2019.
So they were already married?
They were already married.
Okay.
Any communication I had with David up to that point was on the phone. And a lot of our conversations ended up with him talking about his military days and the PTSD and how it affected him. And he would elaborate about these experiences in the field and in Iraq. And I had no reason to think anything different at that time. I didn't know any different. I didn't know that David had actually been discharged from an erroneous discharge from boot camp. I didn't know any of that. I know Rebekah would say, I don't have insurance. And I go, well, if David's a disabled veteran, you should have insurance as his wife. And she goes, well, no, it doesn't work that way. I said, oh, Rebekah, it does work that way. She goes, well, no, he was in the military before we got married. And I'm like, well, Jerry, my husband, was in the military before we got married. And I have a dependence card and I have health insurance through the VA, through TRICARE. And I said, you should be able to. Just, you have to take your marriage license and your driver's license, and David has to be with you, but you should get it. And then there would be stories about how he'd lost his Purple Heart. And I'm going, Rebekah, people don't lose a Purple Heart. They don't hand those out like bubble gum or a lollipop. Those are something that you cherish and take care of. And she go, well, he stopped paying on a storage unit, and he said he lost it that way. I said, I'm not buying it. But I couldn't, I was only getting one side of the story. And I was getting the side of the story that David had convinced Rebekah of.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, he had convinced her that he was a disabled vet. He had convinced her of that. He had convinced her that he had been in all these quote-unquote theaters and field events in the military where he had IEDs blow up and, that he had all this damage from him.
He was a poser.
Yeah.
He was a poser because if you truly that happened to you, vets don't talk about that.
They don't talk about it. And that's what
talk about
Gary kept saying, my husband. He goes, people who have this happen don't talk about it.
Yeah. That's the reason they end up with so severe of PTSD.
Yes.
And there's so many suicides with vets is because they won't go get help.
Correct. And I would ask Rebekah that. I said, well, he needs to go get counseling, or, oh, he won't do that. So I only had one side of the story. I think because I was only getting one side of the story, that was why it was so hard for me to connect the dots. When David sent that text in January, I didn't understand at that point in time what was going to unfold in the upcoming months. In March of 2020, Rebekah had called and said, I'm leaving. Of course, March in 2020 was when, and it was the exact weekend of George Floyd and that explosive issue. And she was going to drive across country, and literally cities were getting set on fire, and, nobody could control the situation. The airlines were shutting down because of COVID, and transportation you just couldn't count on anything. She decided to stay because of the unrest all the way across the United States. And I was working. I couldn't get off to come out here. I couldn't have gotten out here anyways because the unrest was east to west coast.
Yeah.
You never knew when the next city was going to get burnt to the ground. And,
right, yeah.
So things just started happening at a crazy, unpredictable process. And then in March 9th, of 2021 is when Rebekah called and said, I can't take it anymore. I called the police and David's in jail. And I said, okay, what happened? And she goes, I hit my breaking point. And I said, okay, but what happened? And she wouldn't tell me. And you can only press so hard, you know? I said, okay, well, what are you going to do? She goes, I don't know yet. And she goes, but I'm here in the house and I'm okay. David's in jail. I said, okay.
Did she elaborate at all? It doesn't sound like that she would, as to what that breaking point was and what had happened to cause her to call law enforcement.
No. You know, she just said he'd been drinking. David is a big drinker. I don't recall the exact amount of blood alcohol level that night, but it was enough to make somebody comatose. I mean, it was excessive. He wakes up in the morning drinking and goes to bed at night drinking. And then on top of that, takes pain medication. But actually, he goes to bed really, really late at night. So he usually sleeps through most of the day. So his days and nights are mixed up. But she never told me what had really facilitated it. But I did know about the standing order of no contact. She told me we're not allowed to have any contact. And David would text me and he would say, does Rebekah want this? Or Rebekah would text me and say, I just got a $300 phone bill. David needs to pay his part. And so they were kind of like trying to communicate through me. And Rebekah would say, I don't want anything from the house. Tell him to stop. Then I would also, you know, like when she texted me about the phone bill, I did text David. I said, look, you know, Rebekah can't afford this. And so he did something, but he paid it, but then he stopped payment on his check. So the bill came back to her. He made it look like he paid it, but he didn't really. And so I told Rebekah, I said, I'll pay for it. I'll pay for it. You know, so I paid that phone bill. And then sometime after that, in April or May, David took his phone off her account. And so he had his own account after that.
Was she still in the house?
She was still in the house. There's actually, on Hidden True Crime by Lauren Matthias, there's actually a video uploaded of Rebekah going through the house on March 10th. She had gone out for whatever reason and came back to the house, and she videotaped herself loading and locking her gun in the car and saying, I'm home, or I'm at the house, locking and loading her car, and the dogs were in the house. Rebekah is videotaping as she goes into the house, and the dogs are going nuts because they were in their cages. And so she let them out of their cages, and you can hear her walking through the house, room by room, clearing each room, and the dogs with her, getting down to the basement and saying, he's not here. But it almost sounded like she said as well, Carlos isn't here either. And Carlos was a friend of David's. I can't imagine the fear that Rebekah would have gone through walking into her own home with a loaded gun for her protection. David didn't stay in jail long. He got out on bail and moved into a hotel in Superior until Rebekah got out of the house. Rebekah is driven, as you say. I mean, that was on the 9th, the 10th. On the 11th, she's writing and redoing her resume and sending it to me to proofread it. And she's out in Missoula looking for a job. So she's driven. She knows what she needs to do to survive. I asked her if she wanted to come home, and she said, no, let me think about it. Think I'm going to try it here. And of course, we're in COVID still. And back east, we were totally shut down. There wasn't a restaurant open. If they were open, they were only doing takeout. I told Rebekah, I said, you're welcome to stay here, but you're not going to get a serving job right now because our restaurants are shut down. she goes, well, we're all open here. I'll get a job here. So that's a big part, I think, of why she chose to stay. So she found a job in Missoula at some brewing place that was really a college dive. She didn't stay long. She didn't like management. She didn't like the whole atmosphere. I think she was there for like 3 or 4 weeks. And then she got a job at Plonk in Missoula, which is a very high-end restaurant, almost bistro, wine bar type facility. Very, very high class.
Very upscale.
Yeah, very upscale. She loved it, and she flourished. She flourished there. Her managers loved her. In fact, one of her managers that I spoke to, she said, when I interviewed Rebekah and I saw her walking down the steps to meet me, she said, I knew right then and there we were hiring her, and I hadn't even interviewed her. She said the light around her, she carried herself with such poise and professionalism that she said, I knew she would be an asset.
So let me back up just a little bit here with David.
Yeah.
The question, had he ever been married before?
Yes.
How many times?
Once that I'm aware of. He was married to Kayla. They did have a child. Kayla left. They were married in Montana. Kayla left the state of Montana because of domestic abuse.
Okay.
Domestic violence. There were actually photographs of that incident. I don't know how. I don't know why. I don't know all the details. I can't figure it out. I can't connect the dots. But there were charges made and filed. There was a hearing with photographs to back it up, and it got dismissed.
Yeah, pretty typical.
I don't know why it got dismissed. I haven't been able to figure it out. There was, for some reason in conversation, I remember that there was confusion around the date of the hearing, and it got changed at the last minute, and somebody didn't show up, so it got dismissed. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. That's where I get so impassioned, because there's so many loopholes that protect the abuser, and nothing to do. There isn't any form of, there's no backing to the survivor.
Yeah.
They get one chance and one chance only. And that shouldn't be that way.
No, it should not. And that's something that, having been in this for as long as I have, that has always frustrated me, has always been a burr under my saddle, that victims' rights just don't matter. We've got to worry about the offender or the perpetrators, that they're getting all of their rights met and stuff, and the victim falls through the cracks.
Yeah.
It could be, if she left the state of Montana, and it could be because she left the state, and so the prosecution decided, okay, well, she's safe, and maybe somebody got to her, and she decided to not cooperate.
Right.
There's a lot of different scenarios that could have happened.
Yeah.
A lot of times they just drop charges.
Yeah, I think the actual court case filed in Louisiana, because that's where she fled to. I just don't know enough about those details. It's not my story.
Right.
But I heard about it, and I was informed about it. The police department was informed about it. At that point in time, Missoula County was covering Rebekah's case, and family and people who had experienced domestic violence in relationship with David were contacting the county and trying to file their information and submit their information. But I think it just all went in a file 13, trash.
Do you know whether or not when David was arrested, whether or not law enforcement gave her information for an advocate?
So Rebekah was assigned a crime victim advocate.
Okay.
At that point in time, Superior County did have crime victim advocates for victims of domestic violence. She was assigned. Her CVA was, I wasn't allowed, because Rebekah was an adult. So I wasn't allowed communication with her CVA or anything. It was just between her and Rebekah. And she tried really hard to get Rebekah to do something other than a standing order of no contact. I'm not sure what it was.
She was probably trying to get her to get an order of protection.
Yeah, I think that was it. Because she said the standing order of no contact had no teeth.
Not really. No, it doesn't.
And that, Mineral County at that time only had 4 to 6 deputies. And since this event, I've spoken to Rebekah's CVA. And she said that, when they get something about somebody violating a standing order of no contact, they're not going to do anything with it because it's a waste of their time and they think they have other things more important to do.
Yeah.
I don't know why Rebekah didn't get the protective order unless if for some reason she thought that was going to infuriate even more.
That a lot of times that does. When we talk with victims about giving that consideration as to getting a order of protection, they know them. They know what they're capable of doing. They know what they've done in the past. And sometimes it's all that's going to do is make things worse. I can't. I don't want to do that right now.
Right.
And other times is they just don't understand the process.
Right.
And, unfortunately, again, a lot of times they are not enforced. Even when they're violated, they are not enforced. That, again, is something that should never, ever happen.
Right.
Because that's when people die, is when they do not enforce orders of protection.
Right. And so Rebekah stayed with the standing order of no contact. I know that her CVA did earnestly try for something more. And her CVA was good about keeping in contact with Rebekah. Rebekah was so private, and she was always afraid of bothering other people. I remember telling her, Rebekah, this is her job. She's here for you. You need to reach out because she's there. She's in your county. She's in your state. She knows the laws. I don't know the laws out there. Rebekah would always tell me it's different here in Montana. Every time I asked her to do something or to follow up, she would say, it's different here, Mom. It doesn't work that way here, Mom. And I'm going, I just don't get it. We're in the 21st century. But when we went to Montana, I got it.
Okay.
I got it. I get it now. I know she went to the YWCA, and I would think, well, why aren't you using these resources? But after I got out here and almost stepped into what maybe just a small glimpse of what she was going through, she was working 2 jobs so that she could afford rent and food. These organizations do not make it easy to connect. She had a phone number for a hotline for legal aid. I tried calling that phone number many times.
How many times did you get an answer?
I didn't.
You don't. Yeah. Montana Legal Services, I don't even get answers.
Really?
No.
And so I thought, because I would ask her, well, why aren't you using these resources? And she would say, I don't have time. Well, then I realized she's working 2 jobs and you're already, your mind, you're doing everything you can to stay in survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, you don't always try to figure out beyond, you don't always see beyond the next minute. And I think Rebekah was at a place where I've got to make money. I've got to make sure I have enough money for rent and my living expenses, because she was on her own.
So she had left the house and he now was in the house?
Yeah.
Once he got out of jail, then he went to the home.
He acquired possession of the home again. And so she was living in Missoula, and she was, she was in the mode where I've got to work, I've got to make money. And while she was working at this one facility that was such a dive and she wasn't making any money, there was actually like a 2 or 3 week lap where she was working at both places, getting trained at Plonk while she was working at this other facility. So you don't have the time to keep calling and be put on hold for 30, 40, 50 minutes before somebody speaks to you. Or you keep calling. I can't tell you how many times I called and left a message and never got a return call, to legal aid services or any other. And so they make it difficult.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Well, when a victim is in crisis mode, like you said, it's kind of tunnel vision. It's, and we encourage them also to because there's so much on their plate.
Yes.
And to prioritize. Yes. What is it you need now?
Yes.
What is the most important thing?
Yes.
And I can't tell them what it is.
Right.
They have to decide that. But when they're in crisis mode, their mind it never shuts off.
Right.
They just keep reliving stuff, and it's how do I survive? Yeah. How do I go on with my life?
Yes.
And looking over their shoulder.
Yeah. And in retrospect, I mean, when we came out to Montana, we got the notification actually from David on July 20th. He sent a text message that night saying, and this is after he had spent considerable time trying to reestablish and reconnect. Hey, Mom, I think I need to tell you something, or something to that effect. This was on text message. The deputies just left here. Rebekah's missing. I'm tired of all this. I don't know why they're coming and talking to me. We need to stop all this drama. I mean, it was all about how this was negatively impacting his life. I received that I had already gone to bed that night, so I woke up to that text message on the 21st. I'm like, immediately, I text Rebekah and I call Rebekah, and there's no answer. I waited an hour because, I mean, it was 5 o'clock there. It would have been 3 o'clock here in the morning. I thought, well, if she worked last night, then it's still 3 o'clock. And she shuts her phone off at night when she's sleeping. So I thought, okay, I'll try again in an hour. I think I waited 2 hours, and I called Tony, my son, and I said, when was the last time you spoke to Rebekah? And he goes, well, I think it was a couple weeks ago, 10 days. And I said, well, if you call her or text her, will she answer you? He goes, oh, yeah, always. He wasn't getting a response. And we had the children. We had Tony's children that week for vacation. So I asked Tony, I said, look, I've got the 3 kids. Can you call? So he called. I told him, I said, she lives in Missoula. Here's her address. And asked them to do a welfare check, a safety check. So they went by, and of course, on a safety check, they just look in the windows, and they just knock on the door. They don't really do anything. Nobody answers, so they just walk away. But they were not aware of any missing persons reported. So when Tony called back and told me that, I said, I checked the text message, and David specifically said missing. And so I said, well, call Mineral County. So I gave him the number to Mineral County, and no one mentioned missing person to Tony. And it wasn't until the very end of the day that they called Tony back, and end of our day. So it was around 4 or 5 o'clock, I think. Apparently, Rebekah was missing. They told Tony that they had found her car at mile marker 72 on Interstate 90 and personal belongings on the riverbank. Immediately, my mind just went to all the conversations I had had with David in the past week. The times he would call. On the 20th, he called, knowing I had all the grandkids. Because I told him, I said, I have the grandkids this week. Because he would call often. And I said, I have all the kids this week. I'm busy. But he called on the 20th. And I remember him saying, I've got to go now. I've got to go butcher rabbits. I just thought, what an odd thing, And he was aware that Rebekah was coming to Superior. It was his caregiver. that was going to meet with Rebekah, because after Rebekah left, he had to get a new caregiver.
So when you say that he had had to have this 24-hour care, but yet you mentioned the fact that he put on barbecues and did all of this stuff. Did that make you wonder, how could he do all of this stuff if he was that sick?
Yeah, definitely. And, I would ask Rebekah, I said, I just don't understand. She goes, Mom, I can't figure it out. It's like he goes into Superman mode. I'm like, Rebekah, I mean, in any illness, you have peaks and valleys, but this just seems so extreme. I said, and I'm a registered nurse, so I see peaks and valleys all the time in caregiving in the hospital. And I'm like, none of this makes sense to me. And when we went on vacation with them in 2019, and David was walking with a cane. One morning, he was belly crawling from the bedroom to the bathroom. Like, what? And he goes, I can't walk today. I'm like, okay. But later that afternoon, he was walking. Like, within hours. I don't know if a lot of it was for theatrical effect, to try to reinforce the concept.
He was a good actor.
Very good actor.
Very good actor.
Very good actor. Before all this happened, like they had a Thanksgiving for the forgotten or the homeless or whatever in Superior. And David headed all that up. I mean, he was on his feet for days and days and days, cooking turkeys and doing all that, and I'm thinking, I work with people in chronic pain all the time, and they're just, you can't go and go and go and go like that when you're in chronic pain that debilitates you enough that you need a caregiver 24/7.
And he actually got that through the VA.
Yes. I have my own theories of how that happened.
That's really interesting, seeing how he left the military under
erroneous discharge.
Yeah.
And it was out of boot camp.
It was right out of boot camp,
or it was from boot camp. He didn't even finish.
So do you have any idea what his disability rating was?
No, I don't know. I know for a fact that he receives workman's compensation from a oil field injury.
Okay.
That's a lifetime disability. He rolled a truck on the oil field, 2015, 2016, maybe. I don't know. I can't remember. I don't know the exact date of that. But I know that he does receive lifetime disability for that.
But that shouldn't be through the VA.
No, that's not through the VA. That's through private enterprise, private organization. Yeah. But I don't know what his disability is. I did find a copy of communication to John Tester, a form that he submitted that said, I haven't walked in 5 years. Why can't I get 24/7 caregiver support?
See,
I have a theory, but I think some of the documentation may have been created erroneously.
Yeah, it doesn't sound, my husband is a disabled veteran, and you have to go through all of these different tests. They have to evaluate you and give you a rating.
Right.
And according to the rating as to what your benefits are.
Yes.
And stuff. So it just sounds, again, really odd.
Yeah.
I guess that he would be able to get that, because then I would assume with 24-hour caregiving would give him 100% disability.
I would think so. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't know. When we went to Montana, I was given access to Rebekah's trailer that she was renting, and was able to go through the files that she had taken with her. And as I went through the files, I was just like astounded. I was like, he's not really a disabled vet. You know, she had a copy of the DD-214 to show that he had been discharged erroneously. I think it was 4 months and 11 days. And I found copies of other things. To be really honest with you, I think as long as Rebekah was in the household, he could control her.
Yeah, absolutely.
And after she left, he did not have total control anymore.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's a video of Rebekah crying, saying, "I don't belong here." That was, I think, in March or February, before all this stuff happened. I wonder if she didn't know too much